So hello everyone and welcome to the Cloud Lunch and Learn sessions. Today we have our security series back with Bojan for the last session of this month and this year actually. So today we have Bojan with us explaining all we need to know about Microsoft's identity platform and how we can secure and securely develop our applications. So I hand over to you, Bojan.
Thank you so much, Hugo. And hello, Cloud Entrepreneur. Thank you so much for joining us in this ongoing security series. My name is Bojan Magušić, and I work with Microsoft as a cloud solution architect, focusing on security and compliance and identity across our public cloud platform, which is called Azure or Azure, depending on how you pronounce it. And my responsibility in Microsoft is helping our partner ecosystem build solutions that keep pace with fulfilling the needs of enterprise customers and also aligns with our mission, which is to empower every person and every organization on this planet to achieve more. I'm delighted to be invited to this ongoing conversation you're having around security, and I'm even more delighted to talk to you today about identity and how we at Microsoft see this important topic and even how you can start developing using Microsoft's identity platform. But before we jump in, similar to our previous presentation, I thought it would be wise to get a sense and a flavor from you, from the audience, as to how much you're familiar with this topic. So why don't we start with a few mentee questions? For those of you who haven't used it before, just log on to menti.com and enter the code you see on screen. So the code is 2510175 without spaces. In the meantime, let me switch over to Menti. Here it is. And we already have our first question. So it's menti.com and the code is 2510175 without spaces. And the first question is, what words come to mind when you hear identity platform? And the response is going to be a word cloud. We already have a couple of responses coming in, authentication being one of them, authorization another. Those are very important, the 2 A's of the 4 A's of identity. Access as well, cloud, that's an interesting one, security, and controlled access as well. I see authentication is being highlighted as the word with the most responses, which is very, very interesting and also plays a very, very important role in the conversation we're having today about how developers can leverage an identity platform that of Microsoft to securely or more securely develop applications. Love this word cloud. With that, I believe we already got all the responses. So let's go to our next question. And our next question is, what do you believe is the biggest challenge for developers when developing their own identity platform? And we have 3 options. The first one is supporting authentication options other than username and password, such as passwordless and MFA. The second option is implementing a standard protocol on their own and keeping up to date with changes. And the third option is detecting that a user's credential might have been compromised. So those are our 3 options. And I'm interested and curious to hear from you. What do you believe is the biggest challenge for developers when they're trying to develop their own identity platform? We got the first answers on the screen. There seems to be a clear front runner and 2 front runners. Supporting authentication options other than username and password is one, and the second one is detecting that the user's credential might have been compromised. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds in case someone else would like to also share their thoughts. Okay, it seems that you believe the biggest challenge for developers when developing their own identity platform is supporting authentication options other than username and password. Great. With that, if I'm not mistaken, that's the last of our mentee questions. So let me quickly switch gears and go back into the presentation that we are going to have for today. I trust everyone can see my screens. Would be great to get a nod either from Hugo or someone from the team that you can all see my screens before we go forward.
Yeah, all good.
Thank you, Hugo. Okay, the topic of my presentation today is really all around how we can leverage Microsoft's identity platform to securely develop applications. And what I've thought I would do is to touch briefly on identity and how it has become the new control plane to give us all that foundational understanding around why identity and access management is super important. There we can also talk briefly about what challenges we are seeing in the market and also what should we be looking to do to protect user identities. Then we can go deeper into Microsoft's identity platform, followed by a demo where I'm going to share how each one of us can get started on their journey of developing applications and leveraging Microsoft's identity platform for it. And then we can close on a high note with Q&A, where I look forward to any questions that you might have around this topic today. I would like to encourage you also to take advantage of the Q&A of the chat window in Teams. So feel free also to post your questions there, and I can also take a look once we're in the Q&A section. So that's our agenda for today. I want to just touch briefly on the current technology trends we are seeing and identity's role in this digital transformation. We see the network perimeter is disappearing as we're seeing more and more resources and workloads being moved to the cloud. Depending on which research you look at, the one I found is that an average company is seeing an explosion of devices and applications with an average of 180 apps used by an enterprise. And those 180 applications which are being used, people working in enterprises and in companies tend to have multiple identities, as they can connect from anywhere using even multiple devices. And this makes identity truly a control plane for any digital transformation in our enterprise. So in this world, your cloud identity system is your control plane that connects everything and gives you visibility of your entire digital estate, ensuring that only the right people have access to the right resource while keeping the bad players out. And one of the key ways of keeping bad players out is um, protecting people's and users' identities. You might remember this slide from our previous Lunch and Learn session, and I thought I showed it to you to remind us of just how important it is to secure identities. We covered and touched briefly on how attackers might attempt to exploit weaknesses, and they do it in form of this 4 steps, this simplified attack that we're seeing, where they're looking to either expose insecure configurations, maybe even a vulnerability of an application or a system, or even credentials, such of a user or a user group even, or a mailbox. And they're using it then to access and gain a foothold inside of the productive environment. What they're looking to do then is to spread laterally inside of that production environment, maybe even going from virtual machines to other credentials, applications, even things such as IoT devices and obviously databases and data stores. This all is purposeful, so there is a clear reason and motivation behind it, and the outcome of it could be one of the actions you see here, which all of them are quite concerning. Now, why is this important? Well, we need to understand how potential bad actors might look to expose and breach our systems and applications in order to understand how to best protect ourselves and to secure them. What's very, very important to highlight here is identity is central. So we see identity playing a key role in the first three stages, and we can even argue in the fourth stage as well of this attack, making it very, very important to protect our user credentials and our people's identities, because attackers will attempt to exploit weak credentials in the exploit application. And exposure can also be found in vulnerabilities to compromise user credentials. Next, what I would like to touch just briefly on is an alarming trend that we are currently seeing in the market. And this is related to there has been more than a 300% increase in identity attacks over the past years, making it more critical than ever to build an identity-driven security practice, regardless if we're talking about enterprises and or if we're talking about developing applications in a secure way. And this identity-driven security practice should be based upon strong authentication and even intelligent access policies, which can be adapted in real time. As you might have noticed in the previous slide, we mentioned that attackers will try to exploit weak credentials, which is why when we look at having a strong identity-driven security practice, we need to also support authentication factors and options other than just username and password, which is also one of our main key questions that most people believe is the biggest challenge when developers or any enterprise that looks to develop their own identity platform. What we're seeing is that passwords are the weakest link in this security chain. Without any additional factor whatsoever, just by implementing and turning on factors such as multi-factor authentication or MFA, this can prevent 99.9% of identity attacks. So just by supporting a stronger authentication option such as MFA, we prevent 99.9% of identity attacks. And to minimize this friction between adopting stronger authentication factors, at Microsoft, we're reimagining the identity and access management experience and building it into our Microsoft conditional access, which we could see as an intelligent access policy that uses machine learning, among other factors, to adapt in real time. So its controls, the ones that you're seeing on the screen now, allow us to define specific conditions for how users can gain access to applications and to data behind those applications. What's interesting is you can also customize and manage the policies of conditional access and even receive reporting. And while having policies in place is only half the battle, we also leverage identity protection, which helps provide ongoing risk detection and helps remediate suspicious user activities by leveraging machine learning algorithms. And you might be asking yourself, well, what do those machine learning algorithms take into account? And that's also highlighted on a different slide, but we take into account more than 71 terabyte of relevant security data when we look to verify every access attempt. So that's a huge amount of data, and that's why having this in a public cloud allows us to leverage that large-scale machine learning algorithms to run them on a large data sets to then determine based on the signals we receive, such as from which device a user is trying to access and or from which location and to which application, we're able to leverage that machine learning to have a real-time risk score. And based on that risk score, we can either allow access, maybe even require stronger authentication, or even other controls, implement other controls such as maybe limiting access, maybe the user can access the applications but cannot interact with it. So be in a read-only mode. Maybe if we believe the account has been compromised, we enforce a password reset or other options before someone accesses our applications and data. And that brings us to the next question is, well, what is Microsoft's authority in this space? Why does Microsoft believe it is uniquely positioned to help developers develop applications in a more secure manner? And what we see is Microsoft is one of the largest identity providers. Um, Microsoft manages over 1 billion entities and billions of authentication attempts daily. So these include not only the well-known commercial services such as Azure Active Directory, but also the uh, customer services such as, for example, Xbox or Outlook.com. And over 200,000 customers, including companies big and small, use Azure Active Directory as their identity provider. And when we think of developing applications, we see this is a huge potential opportunity that the application we develop can reach. How can we leverage Microsoft's identity platform as a cloud identity provider? Well, it's available to any app anywhere. The only caveat we need to be conscious of is that access to the endpoint for our cloud identity provider is required. So in case of Microsoft, that would be https://login.microsoftonline.com. If that is accessible, we can then leverage Microsoft's identity platform as our cloud identity provider. And we see it's built on top of standards which are being worked on and which are even being updated. So OAuth 2, OpenID Connect, even SAML, which could be argued is a little bit older than OAuth 2, and also VS Federation. So these are all open standards which are supported. What's very important to also highlight is we don't live in a vacuum, that's for sure, meaning when there is a shift in the industry or maybe there is an update in one of the standards, this is something that will be then addressed by Microsoft. What I hear from companies and developers that are looking to implement their own identity platform is it's both expensive and cumbersome to do this on your own because there are shifts and changes in the industry, and adopting to those then would require very, very significant investments in terms of developer hours and understanding what needs to be updated and actually where it needs to be updated in the code as well. So you might be asking yourself, well, what other than having those standards and providing implementations of those standards does Microsoft's identity platform offer? And before I go into it, there is actually something I just want to highlight, which is you might have noticed that Microsoft identity platform, both the I and the P are lowercase. And this is on purpose because Microsoft's identity platform is not specifically a product. So in case of a product, these would be then upper cases and probably even referred to as an acronym, similar to Azure Active Directory, Azure AD. But when we are talking about the developer part of Microsoft's identity platform, we tend to refer it in lower cases. So anytime you talk about Microsoft's identity platform and you write it with lower cases, you are referring to the developer part of Microsoft's identity platform as a cloud identity provider. And on top of just having the implementation for standards that we discussed, such as for authorization, authentication, so the likes of OAuth 2, which are modern, the likes of OpenID Connect, the likes of even maybe if applications are using SAML and VS Federation. It allows also when developers use Microsoft's identity platform to develop applications, they can use it to authenticate their users by using stronger factors, so factors other than just a username and password. And this is something we're going to showcase later on with just calling free key APIs and functions from the Microsoft Identity Platform. Any application, almost any application, I should better say, can then also leverage stronger authentication factors to authenticate users, such as multi-factor authentication, either through maybe an SMS or a phone call, or even a MFA application such as the Microsoft Authenticator. But it can also leverage and supports passwordless. So even FIDO2 keys and combination with Microsoft Authenticator, meaning your application could even then support MFA passwordless on top of just username and password. What's also interesting is by leveraging Microsoft's identity platform, you can also state if the application is going to be accessed on behalf of a user, or maybe it's going to be a service or a daemon. So that's possible as well. And interestingly, you can then couple it with the risk-based intelligent adaptive applications and access controls that we talked about, which come in the form of conditional access. So you can look to then also tie it with that. One very, very important thing that I would like to highlight is developers guarantee for security. Protocols provide us with guidance, but they don't guarantee security. It's the developers that do that. And there are a couple of things we need to be aware of when we're looking to implement modern protocols. A couple of them are highlighted here. So we should really be looked to using a library that not only currently implements the protocol and its recommendations, but it's also kept up to date as there may be shifts and or changes in protocols and in the industry guidance. What we recommend is the Microsoft Authentication Library, or MSAL, which is the best choice when using Microsoft's identity platform. There were other libraries as well, which are being discontinued, and from now going forward, MSAL is the best choice. We do support more than just a couple of technologies. So I'm going to even showcase a very, very simple example in one of them. So we support the likes of JavaScript, or if you're developing applications in Microsoft.NET, also Android, iOS, Java as well, Python, and we even have Angular and even .NET Core. If you're looking to do something with regards to Microsoft Identity web applications, we have those in preview as well. And obviously, we don't live in a vacuum. So our team is always on the lookout what other technologies and what other platforms are being used to have them supported as well. But currently, this is the list. I thought I'd give you just a very, very quick recap that Microsoft's identity platform provides standards which are based on a cloud endpoint, which is why it's important to have access to the endpoint we refer to, which is login.microsoftonline.com. It does also provide MSAL as the notification library with a lot of functions and a lot of capabilities. And it also allows to do something which is verify the publisher. So this all goes back to, are the applications that are being pushed and developed, are they trustworthy? And there's even a process of just registering to Microsoft's partner network, and it's simple matter of associating your ID with your application, which you can make you a verified publisher in Microsoft's identity platform. In case you are looking to develop applications that maybe leverage also API calls to Microsoft 365, maybe to read emails or maybe to access profile information, this is something that can be also then leveraged with the help of Microsoft's Graph API, which we can see as a single endpoint for which we can access the different experiences and services inside of Microsoft 365, but you could also look to extend those to build your own, such as maybe bots or maybe virtual assistants, which is becoming increasingly popular, but also other type of experiences and devices. How do we get started with Microsoft's identity platform in terms of what are the steps that we need to do? The first step is we need to go to the portal and we need to register our application, which is quite straightforward. Once we've done that, we actually set to Microsoft's identity platform, we would like to actually have delegate identity and access management for our application to Microsoft's identity platform. And then we also need to be conscious there will be Microsoft's identity platform will give us an endpoint, which is we could see it as the place on the internet where our application is then going to interact with Microsoft's identity platform, and also the libraries we need to implement to support those functionalities that we covered, such as authentication factors, strong factors, other than just passwords and usernames, such as MFA and passwordless. But we can also then, as part of the Microsoft Identity Platform, we can also expose web APIs, which could include Microsoft's Graph APIs. It could also include other APIs. So we're able to also do something in the lines of API exposure. It is based on industry standards, so we cover those such as OAuth 2, OpenID Connect, XAML. And what's also quite interesting is with regards to user provisioning done through SCIM, which is also an industry standard that allows us to do user provisioning of your applications. We do support not only corporate identities, and when we talk about supported identities, the question becomes, from where are our users coming from? Are they coming from just our corporate directory? Could it be maybe other corporate directories similar to ourselves? Could it be maybe even personal accounts? By personal accounts, you might be familiar with Outlook.com or Xbox accounts, so accounts for consumers. So those are supported as well. And you can even support other identities if you're looking to maybe do business to consumer or business to customer. For that, you can also then look to leverage what's called Azure AD B2C, which enables developers to also then leverage custom identities and even social network identities, the likes of, for example, Facebook, LinkedIn, or others. So with that, I've thought I'd offer you a glimpse into a Microsoft's identity platform. So let's switch gears and let me then switch to the portal. Okay. So Microsoft's identity platform can be accessed for developers, can be accessed through the Azure portal. So it's just a matter of typing in portal.azure.com, registering. Now I have a demo environment for set up for us today. So let me then go and access Microsoft's identity platform by typing in Azure Active Directory or selecting it. The first thing I need to do is I need to say to Microsoft's identity platform that I will delegate identity and access management of my application to Microsoft. So I do that in the form of an app registration. So let me go ahead and select app registrations. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new registration. Now the name here, it's the display name, which is going to be highlighted in the Azure portal and may even be highlighted if we're looking to get permissions, request permissions from users, such as maybe reading their profile information. So let me go ahead and type cloud launch learn demo. For the supported account types, I need to select where my identities or where my user and people's identity is coming from. Is it maybe from just a single corporate directory that I already have here set up? If so, I would go with in the first option. However, seeing the potential that developers can have, I'm going to go and I'm going to select the third option, which is accounts in any organizational directory. So that means my users can be coming from any Azure AD directory and even from personal Microsoft accounts, such as the likes of Outlook.com, Xbox, and Skype. The third part is optional here, so I'm going to skip it for now, and I'm going to click register. And just with that, I already have a app registration set up, which is here. And now I can go into configuring this for my application. Now, the one thing I would like to highlight is leveraging the quick start option, which is second to where we are currently in the bird's eye perspective. So when I click on quick start, the portal is gonna provide me with a tailored experience based on the type of application I'm building. So if I'm building a web application, I'm gonna click here. For mobile and the desktop application, I can click here, daemon here. But what I'm gonna do for the demo today, I'm gonna leverage a JavaScript application. So I'm gonna go ahead and select the SPA, single page application. When I select it, I'm gonna have a couple of options here. Um, React is a tutorial, but that's, from my understanding, underway to be also part here as a wrapper. There are two JavaScript options I can choose from, the implicit flow and the auth code flow. Both of them are supported. However, the auth code flow is the best practice based on industry standards. It used to be implicit flow, but again, industry standards get updated, guidance in the industry shifts and gets amended or changed. And now the best practice is to leverage for JavaScript auth code flow. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select that. As soon as I've done it, I even have a step-by-step guide. So what the Microsoft's identity platform is offering to me is to make changes for me on the fly. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ask the identity platform to make the changes required for me in terms of registering my application and saying I would like for my application to delegates its identity and access management to Microsoft. Okay, so done that. What I can also then do is I can download a code sample, and I am going to do that. So let me go ahead and let me download it here. So what's being downloaded, it's an archive file. So I can go ahead and I can unzip the archive file. Now you will need a code editor for this if you're looking to set this up on your own. What I use is I use Visual Studio Code, which is a very, very lightweight version. And in this case, when I go into the archive, I can then select with the right-click option because I have the Visual Studio Code extension installed, open with code. And what that's going to do and let me just switch gears and click into uh, the Visual Studio Code so I can show it to you. So now I'm in Visual Studio Code. What I did is I unzipped the archive file. Let me just minimize this so you all can see my screen. I unzipped the archive file and I opened it in Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code, if you're looking to do this after our session on your own, it installs very, very quickly. So it's just a matter of installing it. And here I can then go in, I have an overview of the different JavaScript pages and components files of my single page application. What I'm going to go ahead is I'm going to click New Terminal, and there are steps as part of the quick start walkthrough guide that I need to put in order for this application to be run successfully. And those are already outlined. So one is npm install, which is just gonna then install Node for me. I should already have this installed, so it should be straightforward. And the second one is gonna be to npm start, which is we could see it as actually running an application server of sorts. So we see it's listening on port 3000. So let me then go ahead and switch back to our portal and our my web browser so we can see it there. And we're back in the portal. So what I did is I started the application in Visual Studio Code, and the quick start even then shared with me what commands I need to put in. Once we have it up and running, as I have it, we can go then to the URI, which in this case is going to be a local host. And here I have my single page application in JavaScript. Again, this is just an example, but what I'm able to do here is when I go to sign in, now this does depend on the infrastructure you currently have set up. I have this machine Azure AD joined to another directory. So that's why I'm in incognito mode or opening a private window or browser where I'm logged in with a different user. Now here, once I've logged in, so this could even then, this does support single sign-on. So if you did have, for example, a machine that was already joined, it would then also allow you to do single sign-on. What I'm also able to do then as part of this application, I can then make API calls, such as maybe read emails if I'm looking to integrate it with Microsoft 365, or even have something like this to get an API, to make an API call and get more information such as profile information of that user. However, what I would also like to showcase and is logging in with a different user. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to sign out. I'm going to select that this is actually the user I'm going to be signing out with. And since I selected that my users for this application can come from any Azure AD directory, but can also include consumer accounts. So I'm going to go ahead with a different identity. So my consumer account in Outlook.com is the following one. So when I select it, I'm now trying to sign in, and I can even select other ways to sign in. So we're seeing this application by leveraging Microsoft's identity platform, all of the sudden is capable of supporting stronger factors such as even a FIDO2 security key. I can always revert to username and password, but the prune developer amongst you might say, well, we can always support username and password. But what Microsoft's identity platform allows us is on top of it to also support stronger factors, authentication factors such as a FIDO2 security key, or even a passwordless experience such as with the help of Microsoft's Authenticator app. So if I go to my Authenticator app and if I select it here, I already have the request on my screen, so I need to select then 38. Let me go ahead and approve it. And I'm already in. So what this shows us is how a single page application, by leveraging Microsoft's identity platform, can support even passwordless, among the other stronger authentication factors, such as, for example, MFA, where I could either leverage SMS, maybe the Authenticator app, but this showcases passwordless. You might be asking yourself, well, how do we actually implement this for our own application? So for that, let me then switch back to Visual Studio Code to show you what you need to be mindful of when you're looking to go ahead and implement this for your own application. So if I go back to Visual Studio Code, I have here the code sample I downloaded. And if I go to auth config, yeah. So apologies. If I go to auth pop-up, there are three key APIs you need to be looking for and mindful of if you're looking to replicate what I did with in the single page application with maybe your own JavaScript application. So three key APIs are the first one is logging pop-up. So what this is going to do is this is going to create a new object, and the login pop-up is the first key API. Which will allow us then to support Microsoft's identity platform for our JavaScript application. The second one is require token silent. So require token silent allows us to don't bother the user. And if we maybe had, depending on our infrastructure, maybe the virtual machine or the machine was joined to already a directory. So this call would allow us then um, to acquire the token that we need without bothering that user. However, if this failed, then we would need to talk with the user, which is why the third key API is required token pop-up. So let me just summarize this because this is super important. So if you're looking to leverage this, what we showcased in the demo, and support your JavaScript application, and delegate its identity access management to Azure Active Directory, you can do this by, for JavaScript specifically, by leveraging the login pop-up, which is here. So by calling a login pop-up, your application then can support MFA, it can support passwordless. Then if you go to acquire token silent, this is how it can silently acquire the token without even bothering the user. However, if it does need the interaction of the user or its attention, then it reverts to require token pop-up. So those three, login pop-up, acquire token silent, and acquire token pop-up are the three APIs you should be mindful of when your developers are looking to leverage Microsoft's identity platform as we did here. With that, let me switch gears and go back to the portal so we can cover when we go back to the initial quick start, we even see more example. And we even have more information here about how it works under the covers. Now, what's also interesting is you could do this obviously for other technologies, not only JavaScript. We saw a lot of more were supported as well. But I would also like to highlight, if you're looking to, depending on the application that you're building, is you can leverage the integration assistant. So if I'm looking to do a develop or build a single page application, I can click here, and based on if it's making an API call or not, what the integration assistant is going to do, it's going to go ahead and it's going to check what is already done and what do I need to do in order to facilitate the application, in order to, apologies, have everything up and running with regards to the application I'm developing. So that's also a huge benefit. Then I might also be interested in making specific API calls. So I can then either add permissions and make specific API calls to maybe something of the line. If I go ahead and if I want to, for example, leverage Microsoft's Graph API, Microsoft's Graph API for reading emails. So if it's going to be reading email information, I need to determine if it's going to be done on the behalf of a user or if it's going to be a service running. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say it's going to be done on behalf of a user. And here then I can go and if I type email or maybe it's mail, yeah, on mail, I can even then make an API call that's going to read the user's email. When I click add permission, then I'm already going to have it here highlighted. So I see I'm making this application is making two API calls. One is going to read the user profile and the other is going to read the user email. There is also the ability to determine who can actually who can grant permissions or consent for permissions inside of an application. That could be just maybe the administrator or the user. So that can be configured as well. What's also interesting is the certificates and secrets. We do recommend certificates if possible above having secret, but also the branding. So supporting if you're looking to get require permissions from a user, things such as term of service, statement, and if I go to authentication, this is even then putting in the actual URI. So this would be then obviously in this test, I leveraged localhost, which is something you can do as well. If this was a production environment, you would be looking for your redirect URI to actually point it to the application in question, which is then something you can then configure here. Again, it's super useful for that to leverage the integration assistant. What's also interesting here is if we go back to the overview. Now, what we've done here is with the app registration, we set to Azure Active Directory or Microsoft's identity platform, better said, that we would like to delegate identity and access management to for our application to Microsoft. With that, through the app registration, we then were able to, with quick start to, depending on the application that we were building or developing, in my case, I decided to go for a single page JavaScript application, which got selected here. So I even can see what are the prerequisites for it, what do I need to have in place before I start, and then what are the steps needed to either allow the portal to make necessary changes for me in order to make sure everything is up and running. What I was also able to do is download the code sample. And again, the three key APIs to be mindful of is login pop-up, acquire token silent, acquire token pop-up, because these are the ones that login pop-up will support then not only stronger authentication factors such as MFA, but also newer ones such as passwordless. So allowing me as a user to log in without even providing a password, just with my username, and then with something such as the Authenticator app, it could also be a FIDO2 key. Once I've done it and downloaded the code sample, I can go ahead and configure it. For this, I use Visual Studio Code. You can also use another integrated development environment or IDE of your choice. And I can then start with these two commands. I've started the application server, which I was able then to interact with in this browser by logging in. And depending on which where I selected that my users were coming from, I was able to then log in here, even by leveraging passwordless, just by calling those three APIs that we outlined: login pop-up, acquire token silent, acquire token pop-up. And obviously here there are more configurations you can configure, such as if your application is using maybe certificates and or secrets, if it's exposing APIs or making other API calls, such as to the Microsoft 365 Graph, maybe to Azure, and maybe even to others, such as maybe to your other systems or applications. What I would also like to leave you with is, as part of the overview, if we go ahead and click on the Manage application, this is super interesting because all applications inside of an enterprise usually tend to have also the internal IT involved, where the internal IT might be looking, for example, to assign users, to determine which users or which groups are part of, which are going to be assigned with this application, and even then support things such as single sign-on and other, maybe even calls to on-premises infrastructure through an application proxy. And if you remember what we covered with an intelligent adaptive access control with real-time risk in terms of conditional access, this is where your IT team could look to define this as well. So it's a really end-to-end process. With that, let me then go ahead and switch back to the presentation. There are a couple of call to actions I would like to leave you with today. If you're looking to demo and or get started today, I would encourage you to join the Microsoft 365 Developer Program. This program would allow you to have a demo environment similar to the one I had, and even leverage what we refer to as data packs, which provide you the necessary licenses, user profiles that you can already then use as part of your application or as part of your prototyping. And with that, that concludes my prepared remarks for today. Thank you so much for your invitation to be part of this conversation you're having around security and especially around identity and how developers can use a cloud identity provider such as Microsoft's identity platform, what we showcased today, to more securely develop applications by delegating identity and access management to Microsoft, supporting factors, authentication factors such as MFA, and even passwordless. And with that, I'll open it up for Q&A. Feel free to either come off mute, and in the meantime, let me go ahead and see if we have any questions in the chat window.
Great session, Bohan. Thank you so much. And before we proceed with the questions, we have here actually a question for you. I would kindly ask you again, for the ones that join in the middle of the session, to just take a minute and register to this session so you can access relevant materials provided by Microsoft. You can scan the QR code or even use the aka.ms link. And in terms of the question, so there is a question from Andrew, and let me just forward the question to you. So he's saying that in relation to the SolarWinds issue, how does it impact the zero trust model?
Super interesting question. Thank you so much, Andrew. So the zero trust model is not a technology. So the zero trust model is more a mindset or a framework that outlines what we should be looking out for. It starts with, it boils down to always explicitly verifying and never implicitly trusting. What do we mean by it? Where, as we mentioned, the network perimeter is disappearing with more and more clouds, more and more workloads, apologies, being moved to public clouds. And by moving them to public clouds, we see identity as the control plane. What we also see is that network perimeter is disappearing, meaning what was once trusted, maybe behind our network perimeter, now can't be trusted because it's not behind that network perimeter. It's then in cloud, it's maybe in multi-clouds of different public cloud providers. So we need to adopt a different mindset and approach to it. And by zero trust, we go that you should, it's a framework. So there is no such thing as a zero trust technology. It's a framework and mindset where we're looking to explicitly verify, which we are also then doing with conditional access. We're verifying which user from which application device accessing is looking to access what application. And then based on the 71 terabyte, which is a conservative number, tends to be always higher, we tend to also give a risk score for that session that the user identity is trying to access either the specific application, which could be a developer application, or it could be even data sitting behind that developer application. So that's why when we have something like SolarWinds, it doesn't change the zero trust principle as such, because the framework still is valid. What does happen is, if we look at the ways that potential bad actors might stay away, if you remember, we covered um, the simplification of how an actor might gain access to an environment, which saw that identity is key. But when it comes to security, there is no silver bullet, which is why we believe in a layered approach. So having safeguards in place that minimize our overall risk and a risk exposure. I hope I understood your scenario.
Yeah, Andrew, let us know. Yeah, okay. So he basically says that it's all good. So if anyone has any question, feel free to just come unmute and just ask the question. Yeah.
Feel free to do so, or if you maybe prefer to not come off mute, that's also okay. Feel free in that case to leverage the chat window. We do have time for, I believe, one or maximum two more questions.
Yeah. And also, if you want, Boyan, you can leave your contacts, and if people want to somehow contact you with any question or recommendation, so they can reach you out.
That's a great suggestion. Thanks so much, Hugo. I went ahead and pasted my email address, and I can also say it here for people listening to the recording. It's my first name, that last name at Microsoft.com. So BOJAN.MAGUSIC at Microsoft.com. So feel free to drop me an email, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, I think we are good to go. And just one last step quickly, I please just ask you if you can, since this is the last session of our security series, please just take a minute and use our form to provide some feedback about the session and about the speaker. It's really important to us as well. And I think that's it. We can close it out. I wish Merry Christmas to all of you. And we are back in January. And stay safe and well. And thank you so much, Boyan, for all these amazing sessions.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be part of the conversation you're having around security identity. And with that, I wish you happy holidays. Take care, everyone.